Stephen Few. These pie charts are showing you that it's not easy to become compliant. If you don't know what an IROC is, I don't know why you're here. No, it's Initial Report on Compliance. Okay. What these pie charts are showing is how difficult it is to even, if you say, once you call, well, Martin in his past life and other QSAs and say, okay, we think we're ready for an IROC, hooray, this is what you end up with, at least with us as a QSA. Next slide.
And I wrote about 10 to 20% of the reports that is based on, so in a previous life.
Right. So yay, it's hard. So is it worth it? Next slide. We have no idea. Right? We don't know how to measure secure. There are no secure units. We have indicators. We have shadow metrics that we can start thinking about. But it's a pain in the ass. So what we can do is look at the data. Next slide. All right? And we can look at this. Essentially, when we talk about the outcomes, we talk about what's happening in the threat landscape. Right? First, is it a targeted or opportunistic attack? Year over year, we see an 80-20 split. Weird way that nature works, right? We see an 80-20 split between targeted and opportunistic attacks. Yeah, it's a subjective measurement. All measurements subjective to some degree. Get over it. Second, we ask our incident response guys to characterize the attacks. We give them some guidelines and so forth. And generally, they're mostly moderate, low to none. Just to give you a kind of a thumbnail there, low is something that even Josh and I could carry out. Next slide.
Maybe.
Next slide. All right. So what do I mean? And this is where this sort of, if you start arguing with me about, well, gee, PCI doesn't mean you're secure, this is the first it doesn't frickin' matter slide. Because what we found when we really looked at incidents is that if you have default credentials on your point of sale system, right, you're going to get breached. You're already breached if you have micros anywhere in your username or password, all right, and you've got that as a point of sale vendor, for example. So take a look here. This is just very simple, basic stuff that PCI compliance should have, go back to the opportunistic and targeted, should have, if it were in place, perhaps driven the attacker from opportunistic to targeted. So the point being, 80% of the time, people screwed up. We screwed up somehow. Either we didn't educate the customers got lazy because we're not educating them. We had a problem where we deployed something, there was just variance from good practices or standard practices or whatever you want to cause it. But none of this stuff is O'Day, right? None of this stuff is particularly tricky. Next slide.
Alex, can I ask a quick question to the audience?
Yeah.
How many of you have been out on the casino floor and noticed that the POS systems have been down several times? I mean, not that that's unusual during DEF CON, but it might show a little bit of a microcosm of PCI.
Not just POS here, though, right? It's not single point.
It's not just here.
Entire corporate
that's
networks
even
throughout the city of Las Vegas have been going down when individual systems have gone down.
But it's not, according to what I've heard, it's not even just specific to us. Apparently, there's 5 or 6 different casinos that their POS systems go down all at the same time for 5 or 6 hours. So what does that tell you? Maybe they have the same service provider that is really screwing up the back end.
Well, that way all the failure is in one place. That's kind of handy for us, right?
Yep.
Before I advance the slide, I do want to say one thing about the simple versus. One of the things that Josh has made very clear in a variety of presentations, and several of us have, is that years ago we used to say you only had to outrun the bear, and whoever you were with might be kind of fat and slow, and they would feed the bear. There are too many bears now, but one of the things that this shows is you should tie your shoelaces because there's no point in tripping over your own damn shoes and making it easy for the bears. The bears like us lean and having run and healthy, so there, I'll shut up.
Go ahead, man.
I
can hear you, I'll repeat it.
Just yell. So what is the point of PCI other than reinforcing common sense?
Right. So do you remember Jack said
common sense has nothing to do
thing.
with PCI.
Now let's
There's
repeat
the
the
bear
question.
thing
Let's
that we
repeat the
talk about,
question.
right?
Repeat the question for everybody.
Yeah, okay, so it's what is the point of PCI other than just common sense? What budget? Well, that's a really complex question. Okay, within the context of establishing controls, right? If we wanted to be diplomatic about it, we would say it is to take a population that had wild variance, it's to get them some consistency and see if that actually reduces frequency or impact.
Or if we were more cynical, we would say that it's just to keep the government out of the
Yeah, I wasn't going to go there, but yeah.
Regulation from the card brands. Yeah.
I have no comment on that, but Jamie probably does.
Jamie might have an opinion on something a little bit more sinister about what the reason of PCI was.
Please be sinister.
Sinister? It's actually not that hard, you know.
It's sinister, true, what the fuck, you know.
Think about how all this started. I mean, this is my usual rant about how most of us fail to study history and therefore we're doomed to repeat it. The card brands came up with a way to transfer the bulk of their liability and risk to the issuing banks. The issuing banks were not so fond of this situation, so they found a way to transfer most of the liability and risk to the merchants. Who's next?
Back to Alex.
All right, so remember when I mentioned consistency, right? And whether or not that would affect security. So this column, I don't know if you can see this in the back, guys, but it's available online and stuff. All right, the white columns there, 08, 09, 010, those are when the incident response guys go in, they actually have to do a mini assessment of the environment they're in. So they go through each requirement and they just do yeah, I would have passed you, or there's no way in hell I would have passed you. All right, so those numbers are basic, those are percent that would have passed, okay? So under 2010, requirement 1, install and maintain a firewall configuration to protect data. 82% of the time, the incident response guy said to the card brands, there's no way you would consider these guys in compliance with just having that basic requirement set. This is what I mean when I said, it ain't even close, kids.
My firewall's in a box in my data center, and 3 mice live in it.
Basically.
Are they maintaining your change control processes?
So let me jump in here. I might know a little bit about firewalls and how they're used in the real world.
If they are.
Not anymore. I've erased that all in 6 weeks. Let's back up. Let's reiterate what Alex said. 18% of the time for people that came up in this set of investigations, they had installed and maintained a firewall and configured it so that it protected their systems. Think about that for a minute. Now, we like to make fun of firewalls and antivirus because they don't work and they're obsolete technology. And I've made this plea before. Before we give up on obsolete technology, decades-old technology, those of you who know where I work with a gentleman who, well, gentleman may be the wrong word, who wrote the first commercial firewall, first stateful packet firewall. Just once before we retire obsolete technology, could we deploy it properly, please? It might even work that way. Alex, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Firewalls get me all excited. You can't tell because of what I'm wearing.
Yeah. So you can see here that there is a little bit of sample weirdness between 08, 09, and 010 because of the nature of the merchants involved, many more level 3, level 4 merchants in 010. But it doesn't matter. We're looking for that consistency, right, in terms of security. Now, that gray bar is our PCIR data, and that was at IROC, right, at initial report on compliance, were they good or not, okay? So that is yet, it's difficult. How difficult is it when you want to be compliant without help? And then the other columns represent basically how difficult was it for these poor people to maintain compliance. And you can draw a lot of conclusions from that. I'm not going to draw them. I want you guys to think about them and come up and ask questions and talk about it. All right, but this is, I think, really interesting data when you look at PCI itself and you divorce yourself from the fact that it doesn't protect from ODay and that antivirus is next to useless and blah-diddy-blah-diddy-blah that we talk about on our blogs and our podcasts and all that stuff. Thank you very much.
You know, Mike Dunn's not here, but he made a really excellent point recently. He said when he got into PCI, he thought it was going to take people who didn't care about security at all and didn't have a roadmap for how to do it, and it would show them how to do these common sense things, to your point. And now what he's concluded after having enough data is that you can't make someone who doesn't care about card data care about it. In those cases, they may achieve compliance at the rock, and the data showed, at least I haven't seen this year's, but last year's data showed they lapsed within 1 to 2 months after.
No, that's not what it showed, because it doesn't measure that, Josh. I mean,
I'm quoting him, so you fix it then. If it's broken, fix it.
It doesn't capture that sort of snapshot, because it really does only look year over year. Okay. And I have looked at some of the data for 2010 as opposed to 2009, and that's what scares me. Is Mike is right. When he thought originally that PCI would give some impetus to people who didn't care or who couldn't get budget to be able to get that budget, in a lot of cases there was some movement originally. There was some movement when they first started to become PCI compliant. Unluckily, it stopped. There really hasn't been any more movement. The people who want to be secure, the people who want to be the businesses that look at security as a sales point are becoming secure. The businesses that are trying to not be secure, trying not to spend the money on PCI, are finding ways to fool the auditors, are finding ways to just ignore the whole system.
Compliance hacking for the win.
I would ask one thing, though, too. I mean, you know, we're talking about people that want to become secure. What about those that, quote unquote, want to become compliant, and the fact that that doesn't mean you're secure at all? Wow. I mean, there's a lot of people that want to check the box. They don't want to be fined.
Okay. How many people out here still think that security equals compliance? Anybody?
That's a bait. That's terrible.
I'm sorry.
Hey,
I'm sorry, Marty. Was it 2004? 1998?
Back when you were still young?
So theoretically, I'm a moderator, but actually I'm an immoderator, and this is where I'll jump in and don't make assumptions based on where I may have been for the past 4 years, because I've seen a lot of other things, but sometimes people cheat. One of the things that I saw that was kind of interesting was somebody had a problem with a certain piece of malware tearing their network up. Because I was familiar with the system they were running, I noticed an interesting icon. They had an exclusion for IPS that excluded IPS from their NTP server. Now, if you've seen H.D. Moore's talk from a couple of years ago about the interesting information that you can leak out of NTP, you might think maybe that's a bad idea. But it's still just an NTP server. But I noticed it was actually the icon that the particular system they were using in this IPS system was an icon for a network, not an individual host. The network definition that was used for exclusions, not just in IPS, but also in web content filtering and some other places on this particular not customer, that would be irresponsible of me, this random person, happened to be 0.0.0.0/0.
Love that subnet.
However, wait, is this the pick on ISC squared or some other certification body?
We could easily go there.
No,
we could go there. That's fine.
But
anytime.
It got past the auditor, and so they kind of forgot that they had created an exclusion for their compromised NTP server that covered the entire network, and then they were whining that having defeated all of their security systems, they were owned inside out, upside down. And actually the call started because their Exchange server was creating too many alerts on some defensive system that we make fun of. But sometimes people cheat. Anybody in this room that has done penetration tests has probably found it. Anybody that does defensive stuff has probably seen this. But it turns out